back. Well, the Prime Minister has arrived in the United States as part of a 4-day trip to convince Congress to vote through billions of dollars in funding for the AUKUS nuclear submarine project. He'll meet with President Biden and the First Lady for a state dinner on Wednesday night. But with Republicans still in deadlock over whether Jim Jordan should be the next Speaker of the House, will Albanese's visit be overshadowed by both Israel and domestic politics? Sky News contributor Kosha Gada joins me now. Thanks so much for your time. What would a successful trip in the United States look like for Albanese?
Great to be with you, Sharri. Look, there's obviously the surface level agenda, obviously the AUKUS deal that he's there for, and seeing some movement in the positive direction and messaging coming out of that in support of what Prime Minister Albanese is going with would be a success. There's always the second order agenda for whenever there are state visits between leaders, because leaders, as we know, are always speaking to multiple audiences at once. And so when we look at all the other issues that are gripping the world right now, whether it's national unity back home, whether it's the economy and the impact that the U.S. has on that, whether it's national defense, whether it's showing allegiance with foreign conflicts in Israel, Ukraine, and elsewhere, I think getting some messaging out of that in favor of Prime Minister Albanese would be successful. But I think, to be honest, a lot of people tune these trips out, and I'm not sure how much they're paying attention.
Look, Joe Biden has clearly been trying at least to play a leadership role in the Middle East. He's been to Israel. He's had numerous phone calls with Benjamin Netanyahu. Of course, his meeting with Arab leaders was cancelled. Do you think he is doing enough as the leader of the free world to try and help resolve this situation, get the hostages back? Is he putting enough pressure on Hamas and on Egypt?
You know, the U.S. is a nation divided, increasingly divided. And I think because of that, the answer to that question, Sharri, is never going to have consensus support. Because back to that point of leaders always speaking to multiple audiences, President Biden is obviously wanting to signal strength to the world as the leader of the free world. Back home, though, there are clear lines of division in his own party. There are many people that see this conflict differently or have sympathy maybe a little bit more for the Hamas side of the equation than not, and he's got to balance that in his own party. There's also this divide between the working class and sort of the populist wing, both from the left and the right, and the so-called establishment, where the former, you know, as much as they sympathize with the people that were victims of these atrocities, they just do not believe the country should be intervening, should be sending funding, should be sending troops if it ever came to that. And they really want a return to self-reliance and a focus on domestic issues. So with that always sort of gnawing at him, it's really difficult. I think each layer between diplomacy, financial and economic support, and military support, he's got a lot of turmoil back home to deal with. And I think because of that, his hands are sort of tied behind his back. He's also not the most strong speaker, though I will say his messaging on Israel has generally been on point, though, you know, he doesn't come across as somebody that conveys a lot of strength, as we discuss week to week.
Look, we've just seen that the US has announced $100 million in funding in aid for Gaza. $100 million. I mean, we've seen a lot of evidence over the years of international aid being misused, being stolen by Hamas, and then used for terrorism, used for weaponry, and the aid hasn't actually gone to the innocent Palestinians. You know, how much concern is there that $100 million could end up in the hands of Hamas?
A lot. I think that's a great question. And just this whole framework of money sloshing around out there in the world, or arms or other support and cash or a kind, is increasingly becoming a cause for concern, because to your point, there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of intermediaries that take things along the way. There's a lot of laundering that happens, not just directly this aid, but there's been a lot of discussion coming out about, you know, even things like funding the Ukrainian front. How much of that gets laundered through and finds its way back into the hands of bad actors here, Hamas, or elsewhere in the world. So I think that goes back to the point I was saying, that a lot of people, the public back home, are fed up really about all funding, aid, humanitarian or direct help, because there's a low level and an increasingly declining level of trust in how well that money is being handled, and is it actually reaching the intended target.
Look, we saw some amazing news in the past 24 hours, the release of 2 American Israeli hostages, a mother and a daughter. Why were only 2 of the Americans released? Why were American hostages released and not any other nationality? And what role did Qatar play in all of this?
Very, very interesting. The official view seems to be that it was for optics because this was a mother and daughter duo, very sympathetic just by that nature. I think they were connected to an NBC News correspondent, and so the cynical side would suggest that maybe there was some connections there, or Hamas knew that it'll get extra amplification in the media because of that. And they're trying to signal, we do care about the humanitarian thing, even though nobody's buying that. Obviously, we've seen what they're capable of. And I think in terms of the Qatar thing, that's another big topic that I think I'm so glad you asked that, because not many people are focusing on it, where when we say what can the West do, what can Biden do, what can leaders do to really put pressure on Hamas, that is something that comes up all the time. We know that a lot of their leaders are living in Qatar. Qatar sends a lot of money and it has a very effective lobbying group into Washington, D.C., and so that raises a lot of eyebrows and a lot of questions about why isn't more pressure being put to bear there, and maybe there was some of that dynamic coming to play behind the scenes with these 2 hostages that were released.
Yeah. All right, Kosha Gada, I really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much for your time.